I guess Zara is gonna be in the video today. Hi! Hello everybody, welcome to Hump Day Horror, the Wednesday video where I talk about all things horror and horror related. I have my child with me. Okay, she's... Who allowed you to be this cute? Zeus really just came and laid down on her head. I'm really done right now. Hey, this is not the time. The 80s is my absolute favorite era of horror movies because that is where my favorite subgenre, can I talk? That is where my favorite subgenre of horror was born, slashers. While I enjoy a good haunted house movie, a good period piece, a good like horror comedy, the slasher genre has to be my absolute favorite. This was a really pivotal time for the horror genre because around this time was whenever like horror movies had like an icon attached to them, whether it be the antagonist or the protagonist. And they were usually pretty memorable by like the way they looked, what they said, or sometimes the weapon they had, making the films from the 80s just kind of all that more memorable. Today though, we will be talking about arguably the most famous and lovable slasher from the 80s, Freddy Krueger, and the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Played by Robert Englund in 8 out of the 9 Nightmare movies, Freddy Krueger is a child murderer who lives in your dreams, and when he kills you in your dreams, you die in real life. Like, how do you even beat that? You gotta go to sleep sometime, son. Released in 1984, Wes Craven was inspired to write the character of Freddy Krueger by a string of murders that happened in Las Vegas. All of them had reoccurring nightmares, and they all died in their sleep. So, do with that what you will. The last reported victim was on record saying that he felt like he couldn't go to sleep because something was gonna get him, and then he died in his sleep. So Wes Craven was like, say less, and then boom, Freddy Krueger was born. Wes Craven, one of my absolute favorite horror directors, has directed over 48 films including The Hills Have Eyes and The Last House on the Left, and obviously my personal favorite, Scream in 1996. A Nightmare on Elm Street was Craven's 7th film to direct, bringing Freddy Krueger to life right in the middle of the slasher horror era. The first movie is centered around a high schooler named Nancy Thompson and her group of friends. My absolute favorite thing about Wes Craven movies is that his characters always have strong personalities and are able to think for themselves. Although Scream was released in 1996, Nancy Thompson reminds me a lot of Tatum Riley. They're both strong female characters who are smart enough to fight back. This was also Johnny Depp's first movie ever, and a little fun fact about that for you, Nicolas Cage. Yep, Nicolas Cage was the one who discovered Johnny Depp and got him the audition with Wes Craven for A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the rest is history. Now, I'm not the biggest Nicolas Cage fan. His face never changes, and I will literally never forgive him for ruining Ghost Rider, but shout out to Nick Cage for discovering Johnny Depp. We all appreciate it. Some people say that Freddy isn't really scary. I would have to disagree. Is his character campy in this first film? Yes. But that does not mean not scary. If you think about it, Freddy was a child murderer, and even though his victims are teenagers, his murders affected them as kids. So he knows exactly how to channel each individual's fears. At this point in horror, this had not happened yet. We had Jason, who was on a revenge mission, Michael, who blindly killed just to kill, or kill his family members, depending on which timeline you wanna follow, cause there's a lot of them. But we literally had nothing like this in the 80s yet. A killer that was practically inescapable. Like, for Christ's sake, we even had a killer doll in the 80s, okay? But we didn't have this yet. I personally love this first movie, not really for the fear or the scares, but for how it was filmed and the original concept of the storyline. The use of lighting and practical effects were like way ahead of its time. In the horror documentary Never Sleep Again, the making of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven discloses this information about how they used the same room for Tina's kill at the beginning of the movie, for Johnny Depp's kill later in the movie when he sinks through the bed and all the blood flies everywhere. The crew made this whole room replica that could turn manually, so for each of those scenes, they were turning that room on set, which I think is the coolest fucking thing in the entire world. In the scene where Freddy's arms are outstretched in the alley, that's just 2 dudes on opposite rooftops with fishing poles. That's like the coolest thing ever to me.
In the alleyway, when Freddy's arms stretch across the alley, the idea seemed so simple, and yet the effect was so bizarre. It was just something that you weren't expecting at all.
Oh, the alley scene, yes, that was very high-tech. His arms stretching out were literally a guy on 2 garage roofs, one on each side of the alley, with a fish pole.
They were air-assisted to be able to extend, and then they were just marionetted from 2 guys with fishing pole rigs, one in each garage on each side. That's as complicated as that had to be.
The upside-down room that they used with Tina, who was shown to be on the ceiling, I had no idea how they were going to do that when I saw the script. I'm still not absolutely clear how they did do it on production.
It was critical that Tina's death had to be something that was completely otherworldly and completely confusing to the audience. The idea actually came from the Fred Astaire film Royal Wedding, which had a great sequence of him dancing around the rotating room. You can do that? I said, well, I think we can. So I went ahead and looked at the logistics. So, yeah, I think we can do this. We spent a month to get this thing done. Built the framework and then built the room inside of that.
All sorts of superstructure underneath because it had to kind of have a structural integrity no matter what attitude it was in.
Floors, walls, ceiling, everything is framed in 2x6s and double-layer plywood because nothing can move. Every little thing had to be reconsidered. What are the decorations in the room? How are we going to nail them down when the room turns?
Everything in the room, all the curtains, anything that would flop or move was just starched to hell or pinned down. We strapped Amanda's boyfriend down to the floor. We had his hair totally lacquered. And then there were 2 kind of jump seats that were bolted to the wall, and the camera was bolted to the wall.
The cameraman had himself strapped into a chair, and he kept the camera on, and he went around with the room.
We turned the room by hand, me and 3 or 4 guys. It was very spooky when it was turning all by itself.
It was horrifying. I mean, it was the only scene I think I've ever been part of that was more frightening in real life. What if it falls off its hinges? Or what if somebody falls out of the hole and lands on the ground? It just seemed like so much could go wrong.
I was pretty scared going into that. I was afraid for my own physical safety because I kept thinking things were going to fall on me. I thought I was going to fall out. This has a lot of elements to it that seem really dangerous.
Okay, so let's get into talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Wes Craven absolutely did not want to do a Nightmare sequel, so the studios and directors Jack Shoulder made a second movie without him, completely ditching Nancy's character. Even though Craven didn't like this, and I'm a diehard Craven fan, I actually kind of like this movie. My thing with sequels is that they need to do something different than the original, not necessarily better, but different for sure, and they did that by casting the first unofficial male Scream Queen, Mark Patton. This whole movie was made with the intention to be very homoerotic. Patton, who played the movie's main character, Jesse Walsh, was a closeted homosexual at the time, and his agents and producers of the movies he starred in always told him to hide it. This movie was released in 1985, just 2 years after the discovery of AIDS. So clearly the 80s was not the best time to come out of the closet according to social norms. Just because around the time of the 80s, like, your parents would shun you, you wouldn't ever work again. Once again, I'm just speaking for the time of the era. That's just how it was back then. Not saying it's not like that now, but back in the 80s, obviously, homosexuality was not as widely accepted. At the time, Patton found the role to be very difficult to play. Rather than Freddy being a straight up killer in the previous film, he represented the feelings of being gay / wanting to come out of the closet. This is also the only Nightmare movie where Freddy can possess a body and only has one victim who he haunts in his dreams, really solidifying the homoerotic tone to this movie. A lot of the kills match this tone, but nothing is more blatantly obvious than the scene where Jesse tries to have sex with his girlfriend, but Freddy takes over his body and this weird tongue thing comes out, and then he runs to his best friend's house to see him instead. So at the time, obviously, Mark Patton hated this, you know, he's a closeted homosexual and he's being told to hide it, and yet here's this director who wants to kind of like embrace it, but the studio is also telling him to hide it. So like, obviously that would be very difficult for an actor to do. But now Patton looks back at this movie very fondly, actually thinks that it's very progressive for its time, and he is the one that named himself the official male Scream Queen. As you can see why. Now, before anybody jumps at me in the comments, this is not just my opinion. The director intentionally made the movie this way to show the dangers of being forced to stay in the closet, which I really feel like made this movie ahead of its time. Okay. Now we're getting into the whole Dream Warriors time era of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I kind of fucking hated it. 3 through 6, get that shit out of here, honestly. This is where the movie started to get pretty boring for me. The third movie brings back Nancy, and they do not reference the second film at all. Like, at all. Craven was back in the director's chair, which made this feel more like a sequel than the third movie in a then trilogy. This movie follows Patricia Arquette playing another high school student. I don't remember her name in the movie because it was very boring, so we're just gonna call her Patricia Arquette. Playing another high school student who gets sent to a mental hospital for the dreams that she's having. She is then put into a sleep study group of other teens, obviously having the same nightmare. Heather Langenkamp returns as Nancy Thompson in the third movie, playing one of the doctors in the hospital and obviously immediately knows what the hell is going on. Sounds dope, right? Well, you're wrong. The characters were memorable. Yes, they had big personalities. They were funny. Wes Craven is very good at that. But I was bored. Nothing new was really happening besides these weird dream warriors concept and new ways to make Freddy look gross, which I have to admit were kind of cool sometimes. But nothing new was really done, like, yeah. There's not much to say about movies 3 through 6. I will say that 3, okay, fine. The third one is not as bad as 4, 5, and 6. Okay, I'll give it that. 4, 5, and 6 are trash. 3, okay, still kind of worth watching. But they also kill off Nancy in this movie. Like, why would you do that? That's like if Radio Silence kills off Sidney Prescott in Scream 5. You cannot kill off a beloved heroine that is so memorable and iconic as Nancy. You just can't. You can't. You just can't. Even though the third one is not as bad as 4 through 6, in my opinion, the first two are the only ones worth watching. Moving on to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, released 10 years after the first one in 1994. I will forever sing this movie's praises. One thing you'll get to know about me watching my Hump Day horror videos is that I love when things get meta, and dude, it gets meta as hell, and I'm here for it. This was the first time Craven ever got experimental with his movies being self-aware. Heather Langenkamp is back, thank God.
This is God.
Playing as herself in a world where the Nightmare on Elm Street movies exist in real time, but Freddy is real and goes after her own son. Wes Craven is even in it playing himself, and at one point Heather finds the actual script of Wes Craven's New Nightmare and starts reading it in the movie. Like, God, I love this movie so much. Robert Englund is obviously back playing as himself and as Freddy, and it just makes my little pea-picking heart so happy. The kills in this movie were great, the concept was awesome. I really liked that we got to see more Heather Langenkamp in this movie. I liked watching her being a mother figure. I liked watching her channel Nancy in one of the most meta movies I've literally ever seen. After 4 through 6, I was like, I don't know.
The first two were really good.
But this movie alone made me fall back in love with Freddy Krueger, and just Wes Craven, thank you for this. I'm gonna go a little bit out of order here because I want to save my favorite Nightmare movie for last, so we're gonna skip around and go to the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street attempted reboot, and I say attempted very generously because there was literally no attempt at paying respect to Wes Craven's original character or storyline. Like, they didn't even approach him about making the movie. Like, what? In the early 2010s was when horror movies really started to lose their fire, in my opinion. With the exception of Saw and a few others, everything was a repetitive PG-13 piece of garbage, and horror wouldn't really start making a name for itself again until the late 2010s with movies like Insidious and Black Swan. Although this movie was rated R, it is still a piece of garbage. Don't get it twisted. Starring Katie Cassidy, love you girl, Kyle Gallner, Kellen Lutz, or the guy from Twilight, and Rooney Mara playing Nancy. The cast looked promising. Who doesn't love Katie Cassidy in a very subpar horror remake? Because let's face it, girl, that
Black Christmas remake wasn't good either.
It was still better than the one that came out in 2019. I think anything's better than that Black Christmas remake. I'm getting off topic, it's not Christmas, wow, okay. But anyway, the cast looked really promising, but when you half-ass the iconic first kill, you don't use the original Nightmare house, and you change a beloved slasher to a literal pedophile, yes, they actually actually did this, you might as well go the fuck to sleep and let Freddy Krueger kill you, because you deserve it. This is also the only Nightmare movie where Robert Englund does not play Freddy Krueger, and it is because Wes Craven is not a part of this project, so mad respect. Jackie Earle Haley did a fine job portraying Freddy as more scary, like the studio wanted. However, I found the rewrite to make Freddy a child molester was honestly just like super unnecessary. Freddy's character was already scary. Like, it's a guy with knife fingers who kills you in your dreams and in real life. He's already practically inescapable. On top of that, Freddy is a very iconic slasher with a recognizable look and funny one-liners. He's lovable, okay? But absolutely not in this remake. To say something positive about this film, no, but for real, I did like that we got a scene finally where we see the parents like chasing after Freddy and cornering him in this boiler room / warehouse and them setting it on fire. I feel like it does tie the movie together as much as it possibly can, because we do know that Freddy is a pedophile in this movie, so obviously it's pretty satisfying to watch the parents go like fucking kill this guy, because pedophiles all deserve the same fate. Okay, like I said, I did these kind of out of order, but I wanted to save my favorite for last. Obviously, here we are at Freddy vs. Jason that came out in 2003. Freddy vs. Jason is like my all-time favorite Freddy movie, and to me, besides the original, none of them compare. Are the characters memorable? No. Is this storyline great? Absolutely not. But are the kills gory as hell / kind of ridiculous? And do you get to watch Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees beat the shit out of each other for an hour and a half? Hell yeah you do. Hell yeah you do. I really want to make a separate video about Freddy vs. Jason because I love it so much, and so much was attached to it and trying to make it and the history of it, so I want to save all the details for later. Leave a comment if you want this own video, even though I'm probably gonna do it anyway. But anyway, this movie was a huge deal to the genre at the time. Studios and directors far and wide have been talking about making this movie since the 80s. Over 40 people presented a script for this movie. There was even talk about adding Chucky to the mix, which I'm probably not gonna, but I would hope to see one day. My freaking boy, Robert Englund, obviously comes back, and Jason is played by Ken Kersinger, who was also in other horrors like Joyride 3 and Wrong Turn 2. They also brought back the original Nightmare House. The kills in this were probably my absolute favorite of the entire series, honestly. Like, there's a kill where a dude gets stabbed repeatedly with a machete by Jason, and then the bed folds in half. Like, you look like an ice cream sandwich, my guy. My favorite scene of the entire movie is whenever there's like a huge teenage rager going on in a cornfield, like teenagers do, and Jason just fucking murks everybody, like bad. Like real bad. And it's the coolest thing that I've ever seen. I really like all these kills. I really like that this dude's head gets turned all the way around, which I probably can't show. Thanks, YouTube. But all the kills in this were like super fun. If you want an in-depth version of all the kills in this movie, please go watch James A. Janice's kill count on it. He goes really in depth about all the kills specifically and practical effects, which you know I love, so go give him some love if you want more extensive information on all the kills and how they were done. With a heavy metal soundtrack, fun kills, and original characters being brought back, you could probably see why this is one of my favorites. Okay guys, that's pretty much it for my Nightmare on Elm Street franchise cover on my channel. I'm still experimenting with the length of these and how long you guys would want them to be. So if this was too short, please leave a comment. If it was too long, please leave a comment. Feedback is very appreciated. I'm still very new to making videos like this, so I don't know the attention span of you guys.
I personally have the attention span of a butterfly.
Anyway, I found this to be really fun. I really love doing these movie reviews, and with October coming up, that's where I'm gonna fucking thrive. And if that makes me a basic bitch, then I don't give a fuck. Fight me, okay? I'm going to be doing polls on my Twitter and Instagram about which movies you guys would like to see. I'm gonna try to knock out 4 videos during the month of October. That's a video every single week, which is pretty often for me because I do 1,000 things outside of YouTube. YouTube, but I'm really going to try to dedicate the month of October to doing these movie reviews because, like I said, this is where I'm gonna fucking thrive. So like I said, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, watch my stories on Instagram for polls, follow me on Twitter so you can vote about what movies you'd like to see in the month of October. But for now, I'm gonna leave this option at the end of this video. So, would you guys like me to cover the Final Destination franchise, or would you like me to cover the Descent movies? Those are your two options. Leave a comment, let me know. Like I said, there will also be a Twitter poll and a poll on my Instagram, so make sure you follow me there for all fun horror content and horror related content. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for new videos on Mondays and Wednesdays, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!